strengthened government strategy towards asset recovery, and I think it cannot be denied that government has gained a lot in asset recovery. We pushed and designed the whistleblower policy, which is giving quite a bit of returns to government. Corruption has done its bit, and I think the government's anti-corruption agenda definitely is recording successes.
But the Federal Ministry of Justice remains the rallying point for government activities in this area.
The dual functions of the Ministry of Justice, which functions are one, advisory to the ministries, department and agencies of government, and the fact that the ministry is responsible for prosecution of cases in respect of which the government is involved, makes the ministry very visible naturally. So fundamentally, I think the duality of functions constitute the basis for much visibility of the ministry as an institution, much more than most of other ministries, departments, and agencies of government.
So you now particularly have the fortune of coming at a time when this particular government says fighting corruption is a cardinal program, and fighting corruption is the duty of the Ministry of Justice. Can we start by asking you how you think we have fared in that very cardinal program?
Well, I think the assessment of the role of the ministry as it relates to the fight against corruption has to be viewed from dimensional perspectives. Dimension of legislation, in which case the ministry has over time succeeded in presenting a lot of bills before the National Assembly for passage, which bills are generally connected to the fight against corruption drive. If you ask me, bills like Whistleblowers Policy, Proceeds of Crime Act, and a lot of other bills that have undertones, that have fight against corruption undertones, inclusive of amendments to the Economic and Financial Crimes Act, amendments to ICPC's Act, amendment to public procurement, and associated things. All these are issues that have some level of connection with anti-corruption, connection with transparency, connection with
and to congratulate the new acting Chief Justice of Nigeria to come at a time that the institution is going to head playing its role of one of the constitutional bodies after the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature at this trying time of our nation. Trying time in the sense of the three identifiable problems this country is facing: physical security, the problem of the economy, and corruption. And this room contains the constitutional bodies that are responsible for bringing Nigeria back into line in terms of security and managing it efficiently by making sure that the economy is resuscitated and that security of dealing business at all stages in the country is free and fair.
I assure you of the fullest cooperation of the third arm of government in the continuation of the war against corruption and misconduct in the judiciary. Where my predecessors stopped, I intend to carry on from there, modify certain areas, but with a general ultimate aim of having a better judiciary befitting the nation of Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. President, for the confidence reposed in me. And with the grace of God, I believe we shall succeed.
At various times, it also went to the legislature. But in view of President Muhammadu Buhari's avowed anti-corruption stance, it certainly would have been naive to think that the fight would spare anyone. So there had been times of division too. The last thing the Buhari administration would like to be accused of is having sacred cows in its fight against corruption. So it has spared no sector in its attempt to sanitize the nation. Supreme Court Justice, High Court judges, and even the legislature have been called upon to defend themselves on various allegations at one time or the other. Prosecution has always been a problem in Nigeria, investigation and prosecution. It doesn't seem to have changed under Baka.
You are very right. We're under a constitutional democracy. The strong principle here is the principle of presumption of innocence. We can't change that. We agree and we admit that prosecution is the biggest challenge facing the anti-corruption agenda, and this is to be expected, really. First of all, it doesn't happen quickly, but the public appetite is very high. Even in an average setting where all structures, infrastructures, institutions, they are very strong, prosecutions don't happen fast, or they don't conclude fast. Investigations take time, and so the commentary that the prosecution part is been a bit slow, it's fair comment. But I think that part of the expectation of the public is that, given the grand corruption and the almost primitive and prebendal way in which looting had happened, it's a cut and dried case. Even if I catch you with your hand in the cookie jar, I must still prove in court that it is your hand and that you intended to steal the cookie that you are going to bring out of the jar. And these are sometimes the absurdities of the criminal justice system. So we have to go through it. But we are fully persuaded that you can delay, but you cannot totally escape. The other point that, in spite of the challenges with prosecutions that we have, is that only an uncharitable person would deny that there's a higher level of anti-corruption out there. Clearly, under President Buhari, there's a different mood, an attitude to corruption. In the previous regimes, corruption was virtually celebrated. Nobody looked this way or that. But under this dispensation, everybody knows. Opinion will be divided as to the level of success. But certainly, some things are happening and they're positive.
Transparency is the hallmark of the Buhari administration. In this, it has signed on to the Open OGP, which is an community initiative which helps to enhance transparency in governance.
So the Open Government Partnership is a multi-stakeholder initiative which now includes about 75 countries, led both by US, UK, South Africa is one of the earliest countries that joined
to do this, and the government has accepted that advisory. An assets tracing team has been set up, including an assets management committee. Now, in the past, the tradition was that agencies that recovered assets kept them. They are traditionally anti-corruption agencies, law enforcement agencies, so they are core scale, okay? And their best skills is not how to manage those assets. But now, we've recommended that those assets should be moved and they should be handed over to an interagency group with core professionals within it. The Minister of Finance is the legal custodian of government assets. So the Ministry of Finance is coordinating this process. And in the fullness of time, the public will not only regularly receive information about recovered assets, it will also get information about what recovered assets are being used for. Now, of course, it takes time to prepare the groundwork, and the appetite is high, and the expectation rightfully should be a right and the demand to know what is happening. I think that the other thing that one needs to say is that Government at the moment already has a number of social protection programs. The homegrown school feeding program, NPower, the conditional cash transfer, the scholarship scheme, and the empowerment scheme. Now, all of these are potential targets for the use of returned assets. Government has said it, that a lot of the recovered assets are going to be deployed to social protection issues under the program of the government. But of course, putting the house in order and stabilizing things, information sharing, reconciling records, it takes time. So, but we expect that in the nearest future, information should begin to come out about how this is going to happen.
On the local scene, the government's whistleblower policy has been a grand success.
So what we need to do is to encourage ourselves to discourage corruption, to encourage giving information to the appropriate authority. But one important point, the appropriate authority must give confidence to the people of Nigeria that when they give this information, it will not boomerang. So this is very, very important. Fighting corruption should be a way of our life, all of us. It should not be president's business alone. It should not be members of national cabinet alone. It should not be everybody. It should be everybody that is a Nigerian. We know that we are suffering. Look at the amount of money that is coming out for revenue sharing every month. It's diminishing every month.
It is a government policy, and as a responsible citizen, we must all encourage the government. We must support the government because the government is our protector. The government has come up with the policy to assist us. We too, we are the greatest beneficiaries. Ditto will be the victim of bad governance. We have a duty to support the government. However, because of the limited protection, let the potential whistleblowers be very careful. I repeat, let them be very careful. Let it not be on a baseless report. Let it not be malicious, because the protection now is a bit limited and very, very slender and weak.
Can the agency turn around and prosecute somebody who gives false information?
Oh, why not? Especially if there is no basis and if it is malicious.
Now, as Nigeria marches into the second half of the Buhari administration, the words of the president in this jingle can serve
NTA International.
follow our news. We are always on top of
After independence, Nigeria's content in theaters increased in the late 1960s into the 70s, especially production from Western Nigeria, owing to theater practitioners such as Hubert Oginde and Moses Olaya transiting into the big screen. Now, this was also enhanced by the indigenization decree issued by the then head of state, General Yakubu Gowon, which demanded the transfer of ownership of about 300 film theaters from foreign owners to Nigerians. And in the 2000s, Nigerian movies started to dominate television screens across the African continent and by extension the world, significantly influencing cultures in many African nations. And this feat has been attributed to the fact that Nigerian films tell relatable stories and is rated as the third most valuable film industry in the world based on its worth and revenues generated. Now, joining me in the studio to discuss an overview of the recently concluded Zuma Film Festivals is Dr. Chidi Maduekwe. He is the Managing Director, Nigerian Film Corporation. Dr. Maduekwe, you're welcome to Frontiers.
Thank you. Thank you, viewers.
But before we go into our deliberations, let's take this insert to set the tone for our discussion.
Living up to its theme, Feast on Films, the festival witnessed colorful displays that thrilled the audience. With a lineup of activities, participants never had a boring moment. The Zuma beauty pageant, known as the Zuma Face, was unique in the sense that it was not all about being beautiful, but a representation of an intelligent, hard-working African woman. Contestants from the 6 geopolitical zones must not necessarily be indigenes of the zone they represent to foster national unity. The opening ceremony, the celebrity hangouts, and costume party night were all entertaining. The platform